All right there, everyone. I've got a wonderful treat for all of you today. A lot of you ask me where I get my news from or what are some of my favorite channels on YouTube. Well, I decided I'm not going to tell you who's my favorite channel out there. I'm going to bring them to you. Alexander Cristoforo and Alexander McCurry's of the Duran. I know many of you guys know them. You write in about them all the time. When we have our Insiders Club, you talk about, well, on the Duran, they were saying such and such, and I have nothing to add, generally speaking. I love their work. I love Alexander's dog in particular. And he's the most famous dog, I think, around the world. And if
Steve, there's actually two of them.
That's right. Hopefully there's not a joke in there, but that's good. All right. No. But if they are brand new to you guys, you are in for such a wonderful treat. I'll have all of their social media links down below for you to go and subscribe to their channels. You got to do that just like I do. They need to be a daily part of your information diet, just as they are mine. So Alexander, welcome. Great to see you again. Absolute honor to have you here on the channel.
Thank you very much. A great pleasure to be here. A great honor to be here too, actually.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Oh, it's my pleasure entirely. So before we dive into things here, can you just briefly give us a sense of how you both got involved in geopolitics and analysis? And what was behind the creation of the YouTube channel and all your multiple platforms that you have?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that we are both come from countries, Greece and Cyprus, where geopolitics have impinged massively on people's lives. So if you look at Cyprus, and Alex will talk about this more, I mean, it's been a battleground for centuries. And of course, 40% of the island is occupied by another country, by Turkey. So that already makes you geopolitically minded. Now, I myself, I should say we're both Greek. In Greece, politics tends to be, or has historically been, very dynastic. There's a group of families that ran things for a very long time, to some extent still do. I was born to one of those families. I was born in the 60s. My aunt was a prominent politician in Greece. She rose to be Minister of Culture. My great-grandfather was a politician. My grandfather and my great uncle were both politicians serving in Greek governments and cabinets. My great grandfather was mayor of Athens for many, many years. So I was in a way thrust into politics. And of course, there's a particular event in my childhood which was very determinative, because in 1967, we had a military coup in Greece. Now, my branch of the family, not by any means all the family, but my branch of the family was solidly opposed to the coup and to the coup leaders. My father and my aunt, fortunately, were in the United States at the time when it happened. My brother and I we were little children. We were actually placed under house arrest, if you can believe it. Wow. And we were there for about a year and a half until eventually we were able to get out of Greece through the help of the Swiss Red Cross. So we arrived in Britain, and when you've had that experience at the back of your life, and at the same time your family again, because my aunt returned to Greece, she became an important figure in Greek politics. I helped her with her speeches. I gave her political advice. I was involved in a lot of what she was doing. Well, that does inevitably make you interested in politics generally, and geopolitics also.
Fascinating. Alex?
Yeah, my father was a diplomat, a career diplomat for 40 years for the Cypriot government. And I grew up in politics, in a political environment, a political household. And so we moved around a lot. My father was in New York. He was in Washington, D.C. He was at the UN, Mexico, the Soviet Union, Greece. And so we moved around a lot. And, geopolitics and politics has just kind of been a part of my life since I can remember. So for me, it's very natural to look at things from a world view. And,
Right.
even living in the US, I would always see things from a worldview. I was exposed to what life is like in the Soviet Union. I was there when the actual change happened.
Wow.
In that summer in August. I remember it very clearly when the Soviet Union became Russia, or at least when I was in Moscow, I saw the change happening right in front of me. I was walking in the streets and I witnessed it. And like Alexander says, being Greek, being from Cyprus, it's, politics is something that we talk about every minute of every day at the coffee shops, at the cafes. People are talking about politics, whether it's local, whether it's global. It's just something that that Greeks enjoy doing.
Since Plato and Aristotle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and of course, to anticipate, if you're talking about the realist views of foreign policy, which are not, by the way, amoral views, but realist views. Well, I was born in Athens, which is, of course, the city of Thucydides, who was the really great realist historian. And of course, it's also the city where, you can go to the Pnyx and you can see where the first democracy actually functioned. So, we have that kind of background behind us.
Yeah, have it in the blood, as it were. What about just the whole notion of broadcasting? Because I remember when a colleague of mine suggested I start a channel, I have to say I thought it quite daunting at first. I was raised in a classroom to ultimately lecture in a classroom, and the academy, I just was always, I had always envisioned myself in that kind of context. So I really had to get sold on this notion of replacing the lectern with a microphone or the classroom with a camera. And you guys seem like you have something similar there. What I find so interesting, what makes your channel so impressive, and frankly validating for what we're all trying to do, is you've made geopolitics, and like you said, I mean real geopolitics, not just reheated Western globalism that we get on the cable channels. You've made a geopolitics that seeks to understand the world on its own terms, accessible to a very, very large audience. I mean, you're talking to hundreds of thousands of people a day, and not just on the Duran, but on your individual channels as well. It's a remarkable accomplishment. What did the prospect of becoming broadcasters? How was that unique? It's very different than sitting around reading geopolitical critical literature and the like. What was, did you find that daunting as well at the beginning, and what propelled you to do it?
I didn't find working with Alex daunting. So when we started doing programs together, I didn't find that daunting at all. I mean, I have in the past been a lawyer working in the Royal Courts of Justice in London. I had to appear before courts, before judges. That was daunting. And then, of course, going on and talking with a friend, even with a camera present, that wasn't daunting. By contrast, when the point came, when Alex suggested that we start doing our own channels, doing something by myself, I found much more difficult and much more daunting. It took me a very long time to find my way.
Yeah, I agree with that. But we kind of stumbled upon the whole YouTube thing. I'm sure you can relate to that, Dr. Steve. It's something that you don't really, or at least in our case, we didn't set out to become video analysts or anything like that. We were actually, me and Alexander were actually just bloggers and writing articles about geopolitics. And, somewhere along the line, we just realized that, as good or as interesting as our articles appear to be to us and to the few hundred people that read them and the 5 or 10 people that comment on them, we're not really doing much as far as making a difference or reaching a wider audience. And so we stumbled across the video format. And it worked because I think we approached it when we were doing the videos together. When we first started out, we just approached it as a conversation. Like sometimes people think, we're supposed to be in a debate, and we get that a lot. We go, oh, Alex and Alexander, they agree on so much, or they hardly disagree. But we always try to tell people we're not, there are many great channels where you can get a debate.
Right.
There's a lot of places where you can get a debate and it gets heated and people argue and it's fun to watch. But ours is very much like, two guys sitting at a coffee shop and just, saying, hey, did you hear about, what happened in the Biden administration the other day? It's that kind of format. And it just works. And the individual channels, I'll agree with Alexander, the individual channels has been just a struggle. It has been a struggle doing stuff on your own, but it also works. It complements the main channel. So it's a nice fit.
Yeah, and it was particularly valuable for me personally, at the end of February, beginning of March, and I could always get my daily, recap of the last 24 hours, just clicking on to Alexander's was always nice early in the morning, and then I'm sorry, Alex's was nice early in the morning. You also get a beautiful tour of Athens. I love how you combined geopolitics with the Travel Channel. I think you stumbled onto something wonderful there. I mean, that's I'm waiting for you to go to have a little, street food section as well. Little tasting of spanakopita, something. I don't know, just like, yeah, this is good. And then Alexander would come later on in the afternoon with an hour long or so assessment. So and then it all kind of gets pulled together in the discussion, the Q&A sections there on the Duran. Why the Duran? Why did you pick that word?
Now this is an answer that Alex knows because he's never actually told me. I mean, I'm as intrigued by the mystery of this as Alex.
It's not. I've just kind of kept the name to myself in a way, but it's nothing. It's not like a great mystery or anything. But I will tell you this: it was just a name that was neutral. It doesn't really mean anything. At first, I was thinking about maybe we should call it global news or geopolitics today, or something like that. Yeah. But then, I was just like, I just want to settle on something that's completely doesn't give any kind of indication as to what we're really doing, and also doesn't, stir up any kind of left, right, center emotions either. It's just kind of a name. And the .com was available.
And the .com was available. But there is something kind of lovely about that. Doesn't it mean enduring? Doesn't the
yes, it does mean that. That was like just one of the things that was an added bonus. It's just kind of like, the Duran, and then it means endurance. Okay, that's cool. That kind of fits.
The things that matter, the things that endure. I think that's, and I think that's your analysis in the end. It comes down to that.
Yeah, and we added the symbol that we have, which is the double-headed eagle, which, as you know, is a symbol from the Byzantine times. But for us, it represented. I mean, being Greek, it's a symbol that we see every day. I mean, some people say, "Oh, it's a Russian symbol." I say, "Yes, it is a Russian symbol to Serbian. It's a Greek. It's an Orthodox. Right. You go to an Orthodox church, Bulgarian. Yeah, you see the double-headed eagle. But for us, it took the meaning of the eagle that looks left and right, east and west, is seeing the whole world. And I think that kind of fits with the Byzantium Empire as well, kind of seeing the whole world.
Well, I found out very quickly after becoming Orthodox that Westerners know nothing about the Byzantine Empire. So no wonder why they said that's just Russian. It's just something you are remedying every single day, which is quite wonderful. And I do think, just to wrap this up, close this out, this loop here, it is amazing watching your growth as a channel, because I'll watch one of your videos, and then when I have to do my research for some dumb stuff that Biden said or something like that, I'll come across CNN videos. I'll come across Fox News. They're not getting the views you guys are getting. Those $1 billion sets and corporations are not competing with the two of you by any stretch of the imagination. So you're hitting a lot of imaginations and informing a lot of lives in some pretty profound way. So it's just wonderful to see that kind of growth. I've been following you for a few years, and just especially since the Ukrainian conflict. You have been invaluable and right there on the front lines. So let's go into that, the nitty gritty there. Let's show everyone what you were born to do here. So your channel has been, I would argue, a major counter analysis to so much of what we're hearing about Ukraine, particularly in the West. We're now approaching the 8-month mark of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and you were on the forefront right away in recognizing that in many respects, this is a war that's being fought on 3 fronts, right? There's a military front, there's a major economic front, and there's a super major media front. So military, money, and media. We are in that media sphere, obviously, thankfully, and we've been on the front lines of what we might call a clash of narratives, an info wars, as some might say. One side says Ukraine is crushing Russia. There's no going back for Putin. This is a humiliation. YouTube is filled with channels celebrating one Russian loss after another. The other side sees these assessments as absurd, and that there is simply no possible way for Ukraine to come out of this with even the remotest semblance of victory. Can you help us make sense of these two clashing narratives? What's going on there?
Yeah, the first thing to understand is that you've got to, if you're talking about pure military situation, you've got to consider the relative power of the two countries. And I mean, Russia is a huge power. It's got a big population, very powerful armed forces. It's got a very advanced industrial base. It's got a very advanced scientific base. It sits on the center of a long network of alliances. In any war that directly pitted Russia against Ukraine, and in which Ukraine was fighting by itself, that war would have been already over. It would have been over in April. In fact, it very nearly did end in April. I mean, Ukraine realized that it was going to lose. They sat down with the Russians in Istanbul. They came up with a negotiation. They were coming up with ideas that the Russians were happy with. We were almost there. Now, the thing that has changed the situation in the war, what's prolonged the war, what's made it take, the reason why the Russians have had to pull back in some places, reorganize, mobilize, get their economy cranking up even more machines and things of this kind, is of course that the war did not confine itself to a war between Ukraine and Russia. The United States, NATO, the European Union, the Western powers all intervened, and they started pumping money into Ukraine. And of course, they didn't just pump money into Ukraine, they also started to talk up Ukraine's prospects. And this has been very methodically and systematically done. And one must always understand that in war, the appearance of things is sometimes as important as the things themselves. So if you can spin a view that Ukraine is winning, even if in reality it is doing badly, then of course that does have a very powerful effect. And of course, the moment the Western powers started to do that, channels started to appear that started to repeat that. You started to get newspapers, television stations, and it's very difficult to argue against this. But of course, the realities on the ground ultimately dictate their own outcomes. And despite the fact that all these weapons, all this advice, all the help from the satellite systems has helped Ukraine, it has never come close to counterbalancing the enormously greater power that Russia has. It has meant that the Russians have been forced to move up several gears, but over the last few weeks, they're showing signs of doing that. And the other thing that's changing is that domestically, the Russians are sorting out that one area where they were perhaps weakest, which was in media relations. They were not good, and they're still terrible at international media relations. And of course, there's systematic structural reasons why they could probably never succeed there. But they came very close, in my opinion, in September to losing the internal debate in Russia itself. But over the last couple of weeks, they've they've started to pull back, and actually they're doing that a lot more effectively now.
Alex, do you have anything on
Yeah,
that?
no, just to add to what Alexander said, I think the Russians, they approached the war over the first 6-7 months with the mindset that they could come to some sort of deal, some sort of negotiations. We were close, I believe, in 3 instances to coming up with some sort of ceasefire. And you could always hear it in the Russian rhetoric when they referred to the West. They would always use the word "our partners in the West," our partners at the EU, our partners in the United States. That partner word started to fade away, and with each successive sanctions package after sanctions package, and these were some pretty brutal sanctions packages, not only targeting the Russian government, but deliberately targeting the Russian people and the Russian culture and the Russian identity.
Right.
You know, barring Russians from traveling. It's unheard of, from getting on a plane and visiting Budapest. You know, this was shocking to Russians, completely cutting off all of Russian media in Europe and the United States. I mean, you know, this was stuff that was aimed at erasing the Russian culture from the map.
Right.
And, you know, I think the Russian public opinion with regards to what was happening with these sanctions and the vindictiveness of these sanctions, along with the fact that the West kept on going after Russia's economy and trying to destroy the Russian economy to perhaps get some sort of regime change or something. I think it just led the Russians after 7 months to say, you know what, this is not working. We're not going to get a deal. We're not going to get a negotiation. Let's shift gears. Let's crank things up, and you know, there's nothing more left. We're heading towards 2 different world orders. There's this existing world order, and we've got to go our own way now. And as we go our own way, we're going to take a lot of other countries and civilizations and continents with us, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's so fascinating when you just said that, the canceling of Russian cultures. Where I remember I just being shocked. Wasn't it a Russian conductor in Germany, if I recall, was Munich Symphony Orchestra, or one of them, Berlin, or getting fired, you know, because he refused to publicly, you know, denounce Putin. And then you had concert programs change. They had Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff or Shostakovich planned to play, and they, you know, or even in the academy, you know, they're getting rid of the Russian literature courses, or, you know, they're literally canceling Dostoevsky. I mean, it got utterly absurd. It does show you where the Western mind has gone of late over the last couple of decades. But there's no way that's not a slap in the face of Putin anymore. That's a slap in the face. I love how you hit it on the Russian identity, the very nature of what it means to be Russian, and therefore a slap in the face of a significantly more amount of people than just Putin.
And when I see stuff like that, Dr. Steve, I always think to myself, okay, today they're focusing outside, like say the United States or Germany. I don't know. They'll just say the United States, the Biden administration. Today they're focusing outside, but tomorrow, all of these tools that they're implementing to cancel an identity, a culture, they're going to import it into the country. And that's the kind of stuff that really worries me and should frighten everybody. Even if you dislike Putin, you dislike Russia and what they did, and you know, you have no time for Russia. Just the fact that they're implementing these tools in order to try and cancel an entire culture, history, and civilization should scare the hell out of everybody, whatever country you're in.
And it's not theoretical. I mean, I learned it from one of your videos in Germany. Now, the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, there's now proposals out there, especially with their rival party in the East, Die Linke, to get rid of them, to actually ban the party.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
I mean, it is astonishing, and of course, going on from what Alex said, I mean, a question we constantly get asked is, why is that this hostility to Russia? And I have to say, I sometimes have difficulty explaining that myself, especially in Britain, where it's very long lasting and very powerful. But I think on the part of some people, it's that Russia is seen as representing or embodying certain things, Christianity, social conservatism, those kind of things, which we anyway want to defeat in our own societies, and that involves cancelling people who support them. So you can see how this can easily get out of control. How, if you go against the Russians because they're Russians, but they are already represent those sort of things, you can come back and say in your own country, well, people who represent and speak up for those sort of things must therefore be cancelled too, because by association, they're part of this adversary in Russia that we want to defeat in some ways. So I think Alex is absolutely right. We have a very dangerous loop here, and it's one that could very easily spin, and I'm not going to say out of control, but in very dangerous directions.
I noticed Jordan Peterson has been threading that loop outward, saying that he's interpreting Putin's speeches and the 80% support that he gets consistently from the Russian people in these kind of situations as an extension of the culture wars in the West. So he's putting Russia, as he would see Byzantium, as part of the larger Christendom, Christian West. And then the civil wars that we're experiencing in the United States, particularly between the woke left and the traditionalist right, is just on steroid. It's Titanic in its Titanic mega form. Is Russia versus the West, properly speaking, and then what you guys are doing is you're tying that together and bringing that downward and saying, what's going on there, and the cancel culture and so forth can easily manifest itself domestically. And I like that holistic way of understanding, micro and macro level. If I can ask, I mean, so one of the reasons why I love your work so much is we are all the three of us are Eastern Orthodox, but we are all in the West, and so I think like the Duran symbol gives, I think that kind of gives us the ability to look both ways. And you brought up this, bringing up Putin, and forgive me if this is a bit of a leading question, but what does the West, what in your opinion does the West not understand about Vladimir Putin? I mean, we could even stretch that out into Patriarch Kirill and the Russian Orthodox Church as a whole. But why is Putin such an enigma to Western frames of reference? I know he's a complicated figure in general. I mean, Dugan wrote that book, Putin versus Putin. So even Russians are having a hard time with this guy. It's a bit of a dated work at this point, but it captures the complexity of the fellow. But that said, if each of you were to identify, based on your own unique experiences, if you were to identify one thing about Putin that's particularly hard for Westerners to understand, what would that be?
I think straightforwardly the fact that he's a very practical, realistic person who decides things in a very realistic way. Now, in the West, we've increasingly moved away from doing that. We want to shape things. Putin doesn't really want to shape things in that kind of way. He says, look, this is the situation as it is. We have to adjust, we have to deal with it, we have to change ourselves in order to adjust. And it's that, I think, is a mindset that Westerners find extremely difficult. You often hear people say, that the Russians, they don't have the rationalism that we in the West have. I'm going to take the absolute opposite view. I think that, on the contrary, the Russians are very rationalist. It is we who increasingly are not. We don't understand that about ourselves, and find it very difficult to understand that. By the way, the Russians find it have found it very difficult to understand about us, but it creates that gulf. And I think when Western leaders meet Putin and try and talk with him, that's the single thing about him that they find most unnerving, and which they go back and have discussed with their equally ideological advisors and try to make sense of, and find it impossible to.
Yeah, I think the hardest part for the West to understand about Putin is that he doesn't fit on the left-right spectrum. And I don't think he views himself in those terms either. And I think that's a more human, a more realistic approach as to how we should look at not only parties, but more importantly, people. Right. You know, there's everyone in the world, they have certain conservative tendencies, they have certain liberal tendencies, maybe they're moderate and in the middle, but you know, as human beings, we all have different nuances. And to me, Putin expresses that very well, because the way he runs Russia is not in terms of the left, right, middle, libertarian dynamic. Right. You know, there's certain parts of the economy which are liberal. There's certain parts of the economy which are state-owned. There's certain parts which are very capitalist. His foreign policy the same. I mean, he doesn't fit in that on either side of the spectrum. And I think in today's West, everything is so left-right to an extreme. And even if you're moderately right, you're extreme. Even if you're moderately left, right, you're radical. There's no more traditional liberal anymore. It's disappeared. Right. Where are the traditional liberals? Where's the anti-war left? That's been erased. Everything's gone to extremes, and I think that's what makes Putin so difficult to understand. In a way, I think he's more human than all of our leaders in the West. Actually, he definitely is more human than all of the current leaders in the West. Right. Yeah, it's almost like an identity politics on steroids, where there's a single identity marker for your group, and you have to. Yeah, you can only be seen in light of that one identity, that sexual identity, that racial identity, that gender identity, whatever it happens to be. And so Putin has this one identity. You know, he's the dictator, authoritarian, KGB Soviet wannabe kind of, and it's just, listening to that and then reading his actual speeches, and you're just kind of like, where is this person you keep talking about? Because from a discourse analysis perspective, I can't find them. It's also interesting that John Burgess, the church historian at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, he spent a lot of time in Russia as a Protestant, interestingly enough. And he wrote a book called Holy Roost. Excellent book. And he made that argument. He made the argument that the rise of the Russian Orthodox Church, in many respects, was the resurrection of it, we might say. In many respects, was just very practical and very organic. It wasn't ideological by any stretch of the imagination. The one sort of atheistic ideology that they had in place for 70 years imploded. And they were in a moral vacuum during particularly the Yeltsin years. And there was one institution specific to every Russian, regardless of whether they believed it or not, or went to attend the services. It embodied the sense of Russian, 1,000 years of Russianness that could come in and fill in that vacuum and provide meaning and purpose and a sense of existential life again for the people. And so the way you describe Putin, it would fit perfectly with how he supported the rise of the church. It's not like he initiated it by any stretch of the imagination, but he certainly isn't pushing. He's not an ideologue to push back against it. And in point of fact is working with the grain on it, because he recognizes, as he states all the time in his speeches, particularly the civilizational ones, we must have a moral center if we're going to survive as a people. And what you're saying just fits perfectly with John Burgess's thesis. Yeah. The minute you start to tear, that's right. The minute you start to tear stuff like that down is the minute your society collapses. And that's what once again, that's what worries me about what I see in the West and in the United States specifically. When you get rid of these things, the history, the Constitution, the Constitution holds America together. Yeah, it's such an
that's
important.
just a racist document. What are you talking about there, Ali?
Exactly. The minute you start to tear these things down, it's
Yeah.
your society gets torn apart, and we saw it
Society
in Russia
tears
throughout the
down.
90s.
Right.
Yeah, we saw it throughout the
Yes.
90s, and that's the scary part. But that's what Putin, being a practical leader, that's what he realized. We have to have an anchor. It doesn't mean you exclude everybody else, but you have to have some sort of something to anchor the country.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I mean, so you're bringing that's a great pivot to the West and the state of the West. Again, what I love about your channels is that Alexander's in London and Alex is in Athens. You're on the front lines now, of course, of the economic front of this war. The sanctions against Russia have clearly boomeranged and are hitting particularly Europe very, very hard. So give us a sense of what Europe is experiencing in terms of the economic fallout of these sanctions.
Well, I mean, I'll talk about Britain because it's the country I know. But of course, Britain isn't in the EU, but it's still in Europe and it's still very connected to the various economic situations. Well, I have to say, over the last couple of months, it's of a rapidly accelerating descent. Now, I have been sending to Alex pictures of things that are happening in London. This is all within my very affluent locality in northern London. And you see soup kitchens, you see queues, you see increasing signs that people are giving up hope, that businesses are failing, shops are closing, pubs, restaurants are collapsing. There is a sense of a society that is going downwards, and which is becoming it's becoming squalid. London is becoming squalid in a way I have never known. Now, what has now happened over the last couple of days, and I don't think it's yet happened anywhere else in Europe to the same degree, but I predict before very long it will, is that over the last couple of days, with the collapse of the Truss government, which is an ongoing process, what's now suddenly happened is that the political class, which has not been aware of how bad the situation is, has suddenly begun to understand how bad the situation in Britain is. Of course, they don't have solutions, but you can get the sense of panic. You're starting to read articles about how anybody who can should leave. For example, this is in mainstream British media. Articles that, Britain is a country which is falling so fast that young people with drive and energy should go and find somewhere else to live. That the country is becoming, well, it's very unfair to Italy, but there was a comparison with Italy that the situation in Britain, that we've lost the sort of economic vigor that we had, and we're becoming a stagnant economy like Italy's economy. Actually, that's, as I said, unfair. It's actually much worse than that. But you're starting to get these articles, and they are being written by people who are entirely in the mainstream. There's a big article today in the Financial Times, for example, talking about an accelerating process of deindustrialization, not just in Britain, but across Europe, because the Financial Times pitches itself as a sort of European, even world newspaper. So you're getting a sense of collapse, of decline, of things going down fast, of the government obviously disintegrating. No euphoria in Britain on the part of the opposition. That the Labour Party is, you sense that they're almost frightened of taking over in this situation, where everything is going downhill. So, which is most extraordinary. But everybody knows what the problem is, that, the economic war has gone hideously wrong, but nobody has the courage to come out and say so. And as a result, we're trapped in a descending, it's like we're in we're in a sort of well, and we're falling down the well, and we just won't reach out our hands to sort of slow our descent.
Yeah, being in Greece and in Cyprus, we were already deindustrialized 20 years ago. Greece and Cyprus were hollowed out by the European Union, by the IMF, the World Bank, when we had our crisis, our big crisis that we had, whether it was with the banks or what happened in Greece. But the Greek economy now is much smaller, as is the Cypriot economy. It's much smaller. It's completely service-based. There's no manufacturing. There's no industry. And the one saving grace, the one thing that saved the Greeks and the Cypriots from complete societal collapse was our family and our friends. That's what saved the Greeks. The fact that the grandparents had a flat, an apartment somewhere in Athens or somewhere in Thessaloniki, and the parents and the children could live there, or they had 2 flats somewhere that was handed down to them. And so there wasn't, Greeks weren't overly indebted. They actually did have, through generations, they actually had a place where they could live. They wouldn't have to pay rent, and they were able to come together and to get through the austerity of the EU and the IMF. And we got through, but we're completely service-based now. We make nothing. Greece used to make stuff. We used to manufacture things, but not anymore. Now with this current crisis, Dr. Steve, the Greeks are running into a really hard time because the currency, the euro, is becoming worthless.
Right.
But the inflation
is
increasing, and it's starting to hit the staples, the bread, the pasta, the vegetables. And you can see Greeks are having a very hard time getting by now.
Yeah. That's stagflation.
Can I?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I just add a point upon drawing what Alex said? Because Alex is absolutely right about the importance of families in Greece, an anchor to stabilize the economic crisis. Of course, in Britain, that is far less the case. Like in parts of the United States, but perhaps to an even greater degree, we are a very liberal society in Britain, and family has become very severely atomized. And of course, debt levels, personal debt levels in Britain are extremely high. So we don't have that stabilizer that Greece has. And I'm going to add something else. If you are going to go down in an economic smash, well, in Greece, you have the sea, you have the sun, you have a climate which to some extent palliates it. Of course, in Britain, foggy, wet, windy Britain, and these are not things not to be underestimated. We don't, it's got dark, it's got cold, and people feel that things are breaking down all around them. And of course, we don't have those stabilizers. And not only do we not have those stabilizers, but of course, to some extent, in this sense of collapse, you see that the attacks on these things, on family, are actually intensifying, because that's a quality of the sort of quality of breakdown, which, by the way, I remember seeing in Russia in the 90s as well, that you saw, that things were breaking down and morality was collapsing, and you can see the same in Britain. I mean, even to the extent of throwing soup at Van Gogh's sunflowers, for example.
Wow. Oh. Well, that leads to what just happened in Sweden and Italy. They both turned to the nationalist populist rights. Sweden somewhat nominally, but nevertheless very significantly, given their reputation as being so liberal, the most liberal nation in Europe. We got the AfD surging in Germany, and particularly Eastern Germany. Vox Party in Spain, I saw as number 2 party now. Euronews was just reporting the SPD, which is the Freedom Democracy Party in the Czech Republic. They've tripled their support in the last several months. You had Macron's humiliating loss in the French Parliament election with the surge in National Rally. What do you see? I mean, is this possibly, could we be seeing the end of this mainstream center left, center right kind of globalist parties in Europe? What do you see as the prospects for a comparable collapse of the center left, center right mainstream parties, like certainly like we're seeing in Italy at this point?
Well, I come back to Britain. There is a whiff. Not so much of panic, perhaps panic may not be the right word, of despair within the political class. They sense that they don't have the situation under control, that things are plunging fast. And as I said, over the last couple of days, the depth of the crisis has dawned on them. But the political class in Britain, the political class across Europe, has been extraordinarily skilled at one thing, which is maintaining control. And they've done that. They have shown extraordinary tenacity and extraordinary ruthlessness in doing so. I mean, they've been willing to trample on all, the free things, that the free speech. You're talking about banning the AfD, for example. And I have to say, I think that even as they sense that they don't have solutions to these problems, and even as electorates across Europe are looking for alternatives. I mean, remember, in Britain, they looked for alternatives. There was the Corbyn movement, there was the Brexit movement, there were all those things. Even as they do look for alternatives, the trouble is that the political class, which still controls the levers, is trying constantly to close those alternatives down. And by the way, I've finally started to see articles in the British media making that very point and saying how ultimately dangerous that is. This is, again, mainstream media journalists, but they do not, I think, represent the underlying sentiments within the political class. So I'm afraid, I think we are seeing challenges. We're seeing Vox rising in Spain. We're seeing Maloney in Italy. We see the Swedish Democrats. We see France. France is perhaps the most important country to see because of, its politics are always slightly idiosyncratic. They're not quite like you find in other places. But the instinct of the political class everywhere in Europe will be to hold on to control, to grind down, to use those levers of power, which they still possess, to see off these challenges. And of course, the danger is that this whole thing eventually could spin out of control, and which we could see a collapse, a systems collapse. We've talked about this in the past. I think we are much closer to that point than many people understand.
Yeah, I think Alexander is 100% right. I think what you're going to see is not only in Europe, but also in the United States, you're going to see these forces try to centralize more. They're not going to give up on their power just like that. They're going to try to centralize authoritarianism, cancellation, censorship. They're going to try to shut down any type of dissent. And that's how you're going to see the next, 3 to 6 months play out, and bringing this back to Russia, Ukraine. An interesting way to look at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is to not look at it as a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Look at it as a conflict between globalism and the sovereign state.
Right.
And Russia, Ukraine, that conflict to me, that ended in March. That the conflict between those two countries was almost resolved with Ukraine saying they're going to be neutral and recognizing Crimea. It was almost resolved. We almost had the signature. And then the globalists came
Boris. Yeah.
Exactly. Dr.
Yeah.
Steve, they said, don't you dare.
Yeah.
Don't you dare sign that document. We're going to get involved now.
Right.
And everything changed. And I think it took some months for Russia to catch up to that paradigm shift. But now I think, you have to look at the conflict taking place right now as globalism versus a country, and perhaps you could say many countries now,
Right.
who want out of the system.
Right. Right. China, India, Saudi Arabia, for sure. My heavens, pretty impressive stuff there in terms of their turnaround towards Russia. Where do you, just to wrap it up, where do you think we are right now in the war? It can't go on forever, obviously. Colonel Doug McGregor thinks NATO is actually on the brink. It's more divided than ever. Yeah, Turkey doesn't seem to remember they're part of NATO. I think they're more interested in their future in the fuel industry right now more than what's going on in Brussels. What do you see happening here? We've got the annexation of the four regions to the permanent annexation. Russia says they are every bit as much a part of Russia as any other part of the Federation. Where are we going?
I think that we are heading very fast now to a situation where the Russians start acting exactly as Alex says. They're putting aside this thing that the West is the partners that they can be reasoned with. They've given up on reasoning with Ukraine, and I think they've decided that this is a war, a war which they are going to make sure that they win. And I think that is what they're going to do. I think that over the next few weeks, we see this mobilization underway. It's going to take a little time yet for all the pieces to be put in place. But when they are, probably around the end of November, the start of December, we will start to see the Russians starting to increase the pressure on Ukraine, the military pressure. Of course, they're attacking the energy infrastructure, the railways, all of those things. In other words, they're waging a proper war, and a war which they are determined to win, and that they have the resources to win. A war they didn't want to fight, a war which for the first 7 months they were conducting in a very strange way, which a lot of people didn't really understand. But always it's because what Alex said, they were looking for a diplomatic solution, a political settlement. They didn't want to be here. I mean, just to go back on a point that we discussed previously, I mean, Russia is now a part of the West's culture war. The Russians never wanted to be there. I remember, I've spoken to Russians. They said, please, we do not want to be part of this. This is your quarrel. It's nothing to do with us. Now, of course, they understand that they are part of that culture war. And you see that in Putin's statements. I mean, 5 years ago, he wasn't talking in this way. He's now talking in this way because they understand that they are thrust into this. So they are in that position. They didn't look for a fight. They are in a fight. They understand now that they got to win the fight. They will win the fight. The bigger question is not what's going to happen in Ukraine. It's what's going to happen in Europe and in the West, where I think the crisis is only starting.
Yeah, just to end it on this note, 100% what Alexander said is correct. But Russia, they want out. They want out of the system. They want to forge their own path. They have an alliance of I won't say an alliance. They have a group of nations that also appear to want to go with Russia on this adventure. Let's call it that. Russia never wanted any of this. Alexander's completely right, and I'll even broaden it out. This is not even specific to this conflict. Russia never wanted the coup in Ukraine. They never expected the coup to happen in Ukraine, the Maidan. They never wanted Hunter and Joe poking around in Ukraine either. They didn't want Nuland and McCain in Ukraine either. They didn't like any of that stuff. They never wanted Hillary Clinton to talk about Russian interference. They didn't want Robert Mueller. They didn't want Russiagate. They didn't want any of this stuff. They got dragged into this. And so I think Alexander is right. Russia's going to finish this. And then they're going to say, you know what, we've ended this. And now we want to just be left alone. We just want to go our own way. And that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, the rise of the civilization state. That's they are forging their own world, and it is an absolutely astonishing time to be alive to see this happen. Gang, I hope you can see why now. Alex and Alexander are my favorite channel on YouTube. You gotta go and subscribe to the Duran. Click on the links below. Alex's individual side, Alexander's individual side, and the Duran, where they come together, and they have a locals page. They have all kinds of stuff. It's an amazing social media combined platform that they have. And guys, we've got to do this again. We were talking before. I hope we get to do it personally. We're going to be doing talks and toasts into the wee hours, talking geopolitics and music and all kinds of wonderful things. I love chatting with you. Thank you for being here with us. And we've got to do this again very soon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Steve.
It was a pleasure and an honor.
God bless.